I've been in technology, I don't know, for like 8 or 9 years or something. I was a teacher at one point, and my previous role, I was in the ad tech acquisition space. So I've kind of seen both sides of the acquisition funnel. So anyways, yeah, we'd like to talk about mobile engagement.
Yeah, and so today we're going to focus a little bit more about the engagement side of things. But I think what's important to kind of note is that we have lots of conversations with marketers from all sides of the funnel or throughout the funnel. And typically when we speak to marketers, there are three things that they're trying to solve for. The first of which is having better access to data. The second is taking that data, leveraging it to build very personalized and relevant campaigns for their users. And then the third thing is to take the results, A/B test, analyze, and iterate to improve those campaigns. However, when we speak to a lot of marketers, it seems like the focus is typically around engage, the engage layer, sending those campaigns, building those messages. And sometimes the focus isn't so much on the access to data or the optimization of those campaigns.
Before we get too deep into it, just by a show of hands, how many folks here are on growth teams? All right, that's maybe a little more than half. How about pure play marketing? No one. Product. Nice. That's almost 50-50. Cool. Let's keep going, huh?
Cool. So one thing that's consistent across all teams and all marketing marketers is that the user journey is complex, and there's lots of areas where you can focus. For instance, getting users into the app is a challenge in itself. Retaining those users and driving conversions. Every step of that journey is a complicated process, and if you miss one part of that journey, one step along the way, the whole user experience can fall apart.
Yeah, this is kind of a funny slide, right? Because we say it's complex, but then there's just 5 steps, and 5 steps is pretty easy. But I'm curious, as we're going to go through each one of the 5, and if you could just raise your hand, and I'm curious which step is the biggest problem for each of you. So starting with acquisition. No one. Nice. That's why you're here. How about activation, that first session, getting people to actually not drop off after that one? Okay, maybe 1/3. Retention. Cool. Referral, getting people to say nice things about your app. And then people who are really struggling with monetization. You've got users, but the money's not there. No one. All right. That's helpful for, I think that, so to summarize, I think acquisition, but activation and retention were the biggest ones, which is good because we have some examples on how folks are doing more than simply having some messages and some notifications to get users past that first session, and then to keep them coming back, and maybe saying nice things about your app too. So digging into each one of those, we have this is certainly not exhaustive, but some common themes and problems that we see along those steps. On acquisition, it's kind of an interesting one because we're not really here to talk about how to spend your ad dollars better, but it is relevant to have the opportunity to take advantage of knowing just what publisher, what channel, what specific creative did a user engage with. So I'm curious, how many of you are able to leverage any data from your acquisition funnel later on into, yeah, show of hands. Okay, we can work on that. And then on the flip side, how are any folks here making use of the engagement campaigns, the messaging further down the funnel as you move towards activation, retention, monetization, to then optimize your acquisition channels themselves? I've got some nodding there. Can you tell me just a little bit?
And we're starting to got some issues with our connections between our data, between like outside of like, the app and into the app, to then be able to understand how many of our customers are coming from, say, for example, Google, and the valuable end are actually activated. So we're now trying to get our connections between our different data sources to make sure that we can understand that, spend more right places.
That's absolutely right. I see you're looking over. Do you have another example of how you're able to?
Yeah, for us, it's to do with the messaging in our ads and then the retention of those users beyond. So if it's, we're talking more about doing plans with friends, then it's a different retention model than if they're coming in to kind of manage their own time. We're calendaring apps, digital calendaring apps.
Cool. How many of you have Facebook or Google as your number one ad spend, as your top ad spend? Some. Are you seeing some issues as far as being able to leverage insights from that in engagement campaigns? Maybe a little bit. Yeah, so this is kind of my acquisition background, where the walled gardens makes it really difficult to without violating contracts of your agreements with some of these vendors, to do much with that data behind. Which doesn't mean that acquisition data is completely useless, but it means that you have to fight a little bit harder to make it work for you. And what we see is customers who are taking kind of a systematic approach, businesses who are taking a systematic approach to to each step of the funnel, are mindful of what can they do to pull in insights from their acquisition campaigns to better optimize the app experience. And then on the flip side, when we're looking at for retention campaigns, for monetization campaigns, which messages and offers and bundles resonate with certain segments, and then throw that back into your acquisition channels where there's a lot more data, a lot more users to play with.
Nice. And moving down the funnel just a little bit, when we think about activation, I mean, that's such a critical piece that marketers need to get right. And we find that what is really helpful is when marketers and product teams kind of team up through this step and really optimize that user journey through lots of A/B testing, and also combining that with messaging to really explain the value of the app quickly, get the users engaged, and furthermore to drive retention in future steps.
Yeah, retention is obviously hugely important. I don't know if we need to spend as much time on this particular one. I think that's probably something everyone thinks about every day. And actually the insights that are generated from other steps are what's going to drive the most improvement in those retention campaigns. And we have a few examples we can show. I'm curious for the group in the back where there was maybe some referral concerns. Can you say a little bit more? I know there's I think 2 or 3 of you. What's the biggest obstacle you have as far is it just not getting ratings at all, or is it only getting ratings when people are maybe not in the best mood?
Well, yeah, we run a service app, and inherently customers are coming in and have an issue. So if they can't resolve that issue, it gets frustrating. So there's a lot of frustration, I think that's probably the key driver. But yeah, I think there's other issues with various bugs and other things then compacts that. And then I think once you start getting low and poor reviews, that just escalates and it starts to become a bit of a trend. So it changes. It's not always like that, but I think certain users will trigger other users, and it can be quite problematic. So
that certainly resonates. I mean, I think it's easy to understand as a consumer kind of the selection bias. It's if it's a lot easier to get upset about a bad experience and want to talk about that than how are you thinking about when? So for the users, the many users who are having positive experiences, how do you think about getting feedback from them to offset the negative sentiment?
So we do use the mechanisms to trigger, certain journeys will have customers have the pop-up to review the app. I think also just making sure that we continuously reach out to those customers. So we had an issue, it wasn't an issue, it was an upstream issue. It was causing some problems with logging because we use a responsive login. And there were some upstream issues which were causing customers issues logging into the app for a certain cohort. So we got, I don't know, a few hundred negative reviews at the back of that, which again spiraled. So I think just reaching out to those customers, which you're getting a few hundred reviews in the space of kind of 10 days. It's a little bit task intensive, but I think just responding to users and letting them know that the fix is coming. And when we did that, the fix went out. We told about that. The sentiment flipped, and all those kind of 1 stars got changed to kind of 4 or 5 stars, and customers really kind of appreciated that communication, which I think throughout stores it's quite difficult to reach out to customers. So we use things like community and various other tools to reach out to customers and just understand what their problems are, and let them know that we're resolving those and we are listening.
So you bring up an interesting concept. A way that we kind of think and work with our customers is when during the session or maybe outside of the session is the right time that a user's demonstrated that they've gotten value from the app. And this works with both app ratings but also push opt-ins, where some customers are, there's definitely a negative experience associated with something that can be perceived as intrusive being asked right when you log in. So hiding that, not necessarily behind one action, but maybe on the third search or the second product or third product during that session, being a little bit more nuanced and kind of creating an interaction between the messaging and the app itself, how it's built. You'll probably be asking for those ratings a little bit less often, but you'll put yourself in a better position to maybe get a higher percentage of positive opt-ins. But what you're introducing was also kind of externally outside of the app, just calendar and building on the momentum that's happening, kind of just with, you notice that there's a high number of positive ratings, and then building on that, which is not really something that I've thought of a lot and is a pretty interesting and valuable way to look at it. Cool, and then revenue. Actually, what's the distribution of folks whose apps are subscription? Raise of hands. Very few. And then purchase-oriented or kind of commercial. Wow. Then what else? When I think of in terms of monetization, I think of it either there's going to be a subscription, monthly, annual, something like that, or there's distinct purchases. Where whether it's you're buying some food, you're ordering clothes, some service that can be repeated. Is there another category that I'm missing?
Ours is free, but it's a gambling app, so you have to register.
Got it.
Yeah, it's not subscription.
Got it. So there's transactions, and the other one is ad revenue, which is basically engagement. Cool. Well, there's ways to optimize those too. Do you want me to start with this one?
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in this slide. This is taking back going back to the framework of where a lot of the folks that we talk to again are really focused on engagement. But the concept that we're trying to introduce, and it's really, there's a lot going on. You all, who knows if you joined your company 1 month ago or 7 years ago or longer, and you're kind of inheriting a situation. But also building a tech stack and a way to optimize that funnel that we were looking at earlier. So when it comes to being able to, when we see businesses and apps who have who've been able to optimize their programs, the fundamental of that is actually data, access to data. First, that's just taking an assessment of what data do I have, what's being communicated during my app sessions, what's offline, capturing that all into some meaningful way. And then also feeding the data that you have into other analytics tools. From that, you need to have some sort of responsibility, being able to control what's happening in your external tools, not having duplicate events and things being tracked. You can't have 50 SDKs in your app; it's going to crash. And you don't want the same data, the same exact engagement data piping into your analytics tool. Then you'll have to dedupe, and it's not convenient. It's pretty ugly. Ideally, you'll be able to move to some place of understanding your users at a molecular or granular level. So having the ability to look at your users, understand what's their experience, and message them accordingly is pretty useful. And that leads to segmentation. So you can align your different offers and bundles and so forth based on those categories.
Yeah, when we think about optimization, we view this as kind of the icing on the cake when you think about the user journey and the campaign process. Having the ability to understand how your campaigns are performing and having data that is clear, consistent, so you can iterate pretty quickly on that. But then also having the ability to A/B test as much as possible, and having the ability to iterate quickly, understand how your messages are performing to certain segments of users, and then having the ability to just adapt quickly is something that's critical. Again, icing on the cake is bringing in machine learning and AI technologies. That's kind of the what everyone's striving for, but few seem to actually be reaching at this point.
And ideally based on your own data, not some model that's kind of handed down to you. That might not, some one size fit all. And I think an important point to all of this is aligning the segmentation that you're applying to your engagement campaigns, to the notifications inside and outside the app, with any sort of product testing that you're doing, because otherwise you're creating an inconsistent experience, and all of that effort is diminished to some degree.
Cool. So moving forward, we recently did a data science report where we analyzed billions of messages and thousands of campaigns. And I think the results of the data science report probably aren't that groundbreaking, but I think what is interesting is just the impact that adding personalization to your messaging actually will have in terms of revenue gains. So we view basic demographic segmentation as kind of the baseline messages that most companies are sending. But when you think about adding in behavioral segmentation, so taking into account what users are doing within the app session, the revenue per message jumps to double. And then when you think about taking that a bit further, thinking about triggering behavioral-based messages, again, there's a huge jump there. And then kind of the tip of the spear we think of is message content personalization. So having each message be designed for each specific user. And what we found is that moving from basic demographic segmentation to this personalized content messaging results in up to 7 times more revenue.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add on that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge we see is moving up that ladder. And I think it can be difficult, as we mentioned before, having access to that data that's going to allow you to reach the tip of the spear. But there are a few other challenges which we'll discuss shortly.
Yeah, and this is not a blame session, right? We can go to the next one to emphasize that. It's not easy to do this, and it's not easy to personalize in every single campaign. For example, in your onboarding, your activation campaigns, there's very little that you have to even necessarily segment, perhaps beyond based on location and some acquisition data. But putting yourself in a position as your users move down that funnel, taking advantage and being mindful of the packages, the products, the subscriptions that they were interested in, whether it was searching, browsing, or actually purchased, and using that to better segment and personalize the message. When you have that data, it's going to make a difference. Yeah, so this is kind of the how Leanplum and how David and I have approached some of the conversations that we have with apps who are struggling with these very questions. And we believe it's an integrated approach, whether you're on product, whether you're on marketing, or on the growth side. being able to to consolidate that data and use the same exact segmentation across across the entire user journey is not only operationally efficient, but it's going to drive revenue. And putting yourself in a position to be able to analyze that information as well. There's a lot going on here. There's no time to talk about every word, and it would be inappropriate. This is just one framework. So we had kind of the five steps that we see broadly apply to many apps. But what some customers, and this can kind of apply both to a subscription, to a product, to a subscription or a transaction-based app, is what can we do more than simply messaging? What can we do to work with our colleagues in product, or what can product do to work with our colleagues on the growth teams to align our efforts and to be able to get better insights and learn. So some questions that come up, is the onboarding experience are the messages and offers during that first session, if you're doing any segmentation, is that aligned with the emails that are going out outside of the app with the push notifications? There's more stuff that I want to get to, so we should probably just keep going. Let's start, actually, are there any questions so far? We've talked about a whole bunch. Vibe check. Cool. So when it comes to optimizing user experience, as far as we look at it, specifically during that session from app start to app close, there's a combination of tools available. There's distinct pieces of code, the features or variables of the app, which can be buttons, they can be all sorts of things, which we'll talk about in a second. But also the messages, whether they are persistent, something left in a notification center or an app inbox, or the temporary ones, these pop-ups that you might have showing that are surfaced after some sort of event, are all available. These are all elements of they're tools at your disposal to better engage, better monetize your users. And when we're talking about the product, again, it can be any distinct piece of code that you might want to test out different versions, whether that's an onboarding flow, whether that's simply a welcome screen, certain text. It can be things that you'd like to personalize or segment. So on the segmentation side, that could be like localizing some screens or some offers based on where the user is located, or based on their lifetime value or something like that. On personalizing, that's more something that's going to be different for every single user. Welcome back, John. Welcome back, David. How was your last order of pasta? I don't know. And then remotely configure. So being able to actually turn things on and off without having to redeploy code is something that we're seeing more and more growth marketers through collaboration with product and engineering feeling empowered to do.
Yeah. And so we really view the app itself and the UI as a marketing channel in itself. And so when we think about user journeys, building user journeys and messaging campaigns, we also think about the UI and how we can adapt that to certain segments of users and show different features. So there's a lot you can really do there.
So a couple of examples that we'd like to talk about quickly. This one maps to that activation, step 2 on the R model. And this question, optimizing the onboarding flow, is relevant to all sorts of apps with different business models. But what we see is, in many cases during that first session, there's a dialogue. You need to demonstrate the value of your app to the new user, and that can be really complex. It can be really simple. Sometimes that's actually might span multiple sessions. Sometimes it's really quick. Hey, this is how you get food. No big deal. But then you also require some information, in most cases, from the user for the app to work at all, whether that's simply an email address or location data or push opt-ins or whatever. So you need to have that kind of dialogue, and it sometimes is more nuanced than just one screen. Sometimes it's several. So what my postcard did is they tried 3 different sequences, sequences of screens that they'd hard-coded, and what was important to them was optimizing for new signups. That first session, let's get people to sign up. Their third variation was wildly successful in terms of new signups. Our analytics tool happened to surface that they hadn't tracked first-time purchase as one of their goal metrics, but there was actually a negative and significant consequence to that first-time purchase. So that encouraged them to try 3B, which got almost the same number of increase in new signups with no negative impact to the percentage of first-time purchases. So basically, with that test and a half, essentially, they've expanded their user base and the folks that they can retarget and get to make more purchases down the road.
Yeah, and so most of the customers that we work with, their first test is typically around the onboarding flow. We find that there's really a lot of low-hanging fruit there that proves to be really helpful in increasing the user life cycle. So
this one's fun. This I think can apply to a ton of different business models. First of all, dear Lara, hopefully she's watching the video at some point. Our colleague is actually this experience is personalized. So there's some text-based personalization in this particular example that Shop Apotheke is been doing. So they've defined that welcome message at the top as a variable that they can personalize if they want. That's not the point of this particular case study, actually, and that's not what's driving the most revenue for them. They've defined these 3 cards on the slider as elements that they have the option to override the code defaults. So they can add location-based segmentation. It kind of depends on their marketing calendar and where there's offers. Sometimes there's regionally specific offers. Sometimes the deals, when available, they'll want to make that more specific to the user's demonstrated intent or purchase history. And so basically, quite easily in one UI, you can have the messages, the push notifications that are promoting products to certain segments, and then you can make sure that the products that they see once they get, or the bundles that they see once they get into the app, are most closely aligned to what they're actually going to want to buy. Yeah, and lastly, Tesco. So if you haven't figured out by now, we're both American and don't really shop at Tesco too often. But when we get the chance, and we're here in the UK, we do. What was important to Tesco is pretty straightforward. Now, this is more the monetization, the revenue driving use case. What was important to them was that folks would add more items to their cart and have to remove some friction in that monetization flow, that revenue flow. So they defined a whole bunch of buttons in the app, add to cart buttons, as things that they'd like to test different configurations of. Their first test was actually really bad because they were just playing with one add to cart button at a time. And so they went back to the drawing board and decided, what if we try 2 different configurations of 2 buttons simultaneously? And that led to an increase from their original baseline of 3.3% items added to the cart. When I look, sorry, Leanplum executives. When I look at my monthly statements, 3.3 change is not going to make or break my quarter. But when you look at the volume that Tesco was including, even just in this test, most responsible tests are within a subset of your population. They were able to learn a ton and increase revenue quite significantly for them.
Yeah, and what we find a lot of times with A/B testing is that sometimes less is more. So choosing a few tests that are going to be really impactful and are really going to move the needle is better than over-testing and muddling data. So that's kind of the approach that Tesco's taken, is focusing primarily on driving revenue and then identifying points within the user experience that they can optimize, but not trying to do too much at one time.
Is there any test that someone would like to explain that they've walked through, that they've done themselves, that might be interesting for the group? This is a workshop. It's okay if you haven't. Yeah.
We're a subscription, so one thing we found was I signed up for a 7-day free trial, and we tried A/B testing the way up to 14-day trial for people that rejected the initial offer, and now that's a 5% gain in overall subscribers.
That's awesome. We often see subscription. You can do a lot of different fun things. So with 7 and 14-day trials, there's the different SKUs in terms of the length of the trial, but also the length of the subscription, testing out different price points for 1 year, for 1 month, that sort of thing. When do you introduce that paywall during the session? There's really a lot that you can do. And as David mentioned, and actually what we see, where we see it done most responsibly is like if you're very early in kind of moving up that pyramid in terms of organizing, getting control of your data and orchestrating campaigns and that sort of thing. Be more conservative. It's you don't need to test everything before you've actually have sufficient information to make logical, to make sound hypotheses. And you don't need to have. What we see across the board is that the most impactful tests are more logically simple. You don't need 17 different variants, and you don't need to be testing 8 steps during the flow at the same time.
Cool. So those are a few examples which I hope are helpful in thinking about experimentation, introducing that to your app, or adapting your current strategies. So a little bit about Leanplum, and if any of these ideas are interesting to you, we'd love to have a chat after. But Leanplum is a mobile engagement solution, and as you might have gathered, we think about mobile engagement a little bit differently than a lot of tools. So we think that engagement is more than just messaging. So when you think about building out your CRM campaigns, obviously messaging is going to be a big piece of that, but also having the ability to A/B test as well. Having that single user profile, which is going to show all the messages that the user has received, but also all the A/B tests that they're enrolled in. It's going to be really helpful in unifying your data.
Yeah, and this is the end of the session, so it's a weird time to say what this isn't, but this is not a change management session. This is not like how to evaluate vendors and your tech stack. But those are things that we talk about every day and every week with our prospects and customers. So there's a lot of interesting questions and not necessarily one single answer for how to best build your program, but keeping in mind the ability to just assess and take advantage of whatever data that you've got. Make sure that segmentation and personalization is flowing through in the touch points wherever they can be, and putting yourself in a position to learn from that and make it a virtuous cycle. Take the insights, which campaign, which message resonates best in general across my entire app, but also then being able to break that down by different segments. It can be as simple as based on what country they're in, but if you can look at usage, your casual, your power, and core users, maybe other sort of VIP versus non-VIP, paying versus non-paying, you'll be in a good position to help drive value for your app and your career. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations on maybe smaller teams that don't have necessarily like data scientists at hand on how to run a successful test in terms of thinking about sample sizes and running those calculations and what tests they should do? So
it's definitely, and even if you do have access to all those resources, keeping it simple is better. Identifying 1, 2, or 3 elements of the funnel that you think that you'd like to optimize and figure out what works. There are tools within Leanplum and outside of Leanplum that will help you do things. So, for example, as we showed with my postcard, we'll calculate statistical significance across 50 metrics that are just kind of tracked in the back end. I look at the graph, and the y-axis is not 0, and the numbers look all mashed together. But we'll tell you there's a two-tailed Welsh t-test whether or not there was a significant increase or decrease over your baseline. So you don't need to know how to run that analysis. There are some optimized. We'll tell you how long. Based on the number of users, based on the data points that you're analyzing and what you're trying to adjust, roughly how long that test should take to generate statistical significance. And if it's more than a month, that's probably too long. So that's kind of built-in guardrails. And I think where possible, reducing the number of tools that you're using to set it all up. So it gets messy if you're pushing audiences across too many tools. There might not be the match, and there's like, you don't want to deal with latency, and you don't want to deal with having like a whole bunch of different tabs and windows open. So to the extent that you can simplify, will put you in a good position. Cool. Are we at time? Just 1 minute early. Do we have 1 minute of content?
Maybe you have a joke.
Those are just for the demo, though. Yeah. Let's save the jokes for the demo.
Well, thanks everyone for your time. We appreciate it. And let us know if there are any questions after the fact, or just come say hello.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.